There's a flower in Texas that waits for the wildfires to burn, and it lies in the dirt till the earth calls for it to return. And it holds fast the truth that it's always known. The resting, the waking, the bloomings and grains. How many things have been made in this way? God only knows. God only knows. There's a gardener devoted to nurture and nourish the land. Both beauty and bounty spring forth from the work of their hands, and they hold fast hope that they're not alone. The sowing, the reaping, the work never ends, and how many others are toiling like them? God only knows. God only knows. Are you astonished? Are you dismayed? When all creation groans for love to come our way. Jesus the healer, we are your hands, planting the gospel all across your hallowed land. Forest, river, and sky.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad that you're joining us today, and we're glad that CSA is going to be hosting many more of these type of live conversations in the days ahead. I'm especially glad that we're hosting this particular conversation on holy endurance with everything that's going on in the current cultural moment that we're facing. So for me, when the new year started, actually every new year, I usually try to think about what are my goals for the year and what is the feeling that I want to embody for that year. And for me, that theme was dancing. And for me, dancing just reminds me of freedom. It also reminds me of endurance, which is, it's not just something that we think about, it's something that we embody. So across history, many communities, especially the Black Christian community and many marginalized traditions, we've practiced joy, we practice song, creativity, dance as embodied forms of expression and freedom of expression, sometimes as escape, but also as survival and as resistance. And so today's conversation, we want to explore what faithful endurance looks like in exhausting times and how joy, embodiment, memory, and community sustain hope when sheer effort cannot. So I'm deeply honored today to be joined by a wonderful panel of voices, and I'd love to introduce them right now. First, we have Jane Hong. Jane is an associate professor of history at Occidental College, and she's also a widely respected public-facing historian. Her work explores how immigration, race, and collective memory shape American institutions, politics, and religious life. Welcome, Jane. I also want to welcome Phillip Joubert. Phillip is an artist, a songwriter, an MC, and a creative voice within communal. His work lives at the intersection of music, faith, and storytelling, exploring how creativity and sound sustain hope, honesty, and spiritual life. Welcome, Phillip. And then we also have Nia Campinha-Bacote, who is a theologian and a practitioner whose work cultivates spaces where grief, joy, and healing coexist. She's a graduate of Yale Divinity School and the Institute of Sacred Music. Nia's work bridges theology, ritual, music, and embodied care. And finally, Brandi Miller. Brandi is the director of formation and story at Quest Church in Seattle and a writer and teacher working at the intersection of faith, justice, and lived experience. Brandi's work reflects deeply on spiritual formation and faithful living in complex times. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here and welcome. So before we start, I want to encourage anyone who is watching to please share where you're connecting from in the chat. And we'll have a brief moment of Q&A. We'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions in the chat during any point of the conversation. So for the panel, I want to start off with a question for all of you. And that question is, when you hear the word endurance, what does it stir in you personally right now? Anybody want to jump in first?
I can start.
Thanks.
Endurance is, for me, something that I get to participate in that has happened before me. So a lot of times when I consider endurance, I consider who has endured so that I can be here. And that is what I consider when I'm trying to figure out how to endure now for those who are coming after me, particularly my kids, but also all those within my circle and those within my sphere of influence. Really, what does it look like for me to remain while other things are trying to take me out, whether they're trying to take out my dignity, my joy, my essence, my ethos, coming against what it is that I believe in, what makes me me, and what I hold deeply to in my soul. How do I stay in the midst of that? I often lean back into who has endured prior to me, and I consider those who need me to endure now.
That's good.
I can jump in. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Nia, and it is such an honor to be here with such incredible other panelists. Immediately, what came to mind for me was actually the ways in which I have not had a healthy relationship with the word endurance, or rather, maybe misguided understandings of endurance. And so the example that immediately came to mind was a long time ago when I was 26 years old, which is a long time ago now. I thought it would be cute that I was turning 26, and guess what also has 26 in it? A marathon. So I decided that I was going to run a marathon during my 26th year of life to do a mile for every year. And so my understanding of endurance at that time was like, push through, like get to the end, y'all. Fun fact, not so fun fact, spoiler, a week before the LA Marathon, I broke my foot. I ran so long on ice because I was training, I was living out in New Haven, Connecticut before, a week before, and I was on like training 20 miles at that point. And so when I think about endurance and my relationship to endurance, I praise God that I don't have the relationship I have with endurance that I had when I was 26, which was this idea that endurance is about pushing through. And now realizing that actually in order to endure well, it's so much about listening to your body. It's so much about breathing. It's so much about honoring and listening and not feeling shame about or thinking things as weak, but like your body, our bodies are speaking to us, the circumstances that are happening in our life. It's okay to pause. It's okay to rest. It's okay to seek joy. We're going to get all this into the panel, but endurance, like it's not just about pushing through, and it's about how can it be sustainable for the long term. So that's what came to mind for me.
That's good. That's really good. That's a good reframing of that word. Jane or Brandi, do you have something?
I can build on what Phillip shared. I mean, I'm a historian, so I always think in terms of history and people who came before. I don't know if that is helpful sometimes or actually makes things harder in some ways. I mean, people have really, when you think about even US history, and we can talk more about this, you know, there's been so many periods of intense change and challenge. I mean, there's been so many crises in the past, and we're going to, you know, there's also been a very long history of injustice in this country. And so when we think about the current moment, you know, as a historian, I think, like, oh, okay, this is part of a much longer through line in US history. So it's not, a lot of it's not new. Like even a lot of the immigration related things were like, they're not necessarily new, but there are certain things that are different. You know, every moment has its differences, and the scale of things, I think, is particular. And so, I don't know, I do rely on history, but I also resonate with what Nia just shared about, I don't know, like, I think for me, endurance, I think right now I'm just trying to think about going like day by day and just taking it a step at a time. And I think that is a healthy way to think about kind of moving forward. But I also recognize that endurance, it just looks different for different people, and kind of how folks live, how folks are able to move forward, how they're able to survive, that it really is, especially for believers, people who believe in Christ, it can look quite different in different people's lives. And so understanding that, you know, people have their own stories, their own journeys, and that it's going to look different in every person's life. So that's something I think a lot about these days.
That's great. Brandi?
Yeah, I mean, to that end, one of the things that I've been considering lately is endurance as an issue of moral and ethical integrity. Because what I've been seeing as of late is all of these people who I think started out, Christian leaders who started out with good intentions for their own moral and ethical and ministerial life, falling to the thing, to money, sex, and power. And the inability to endure through what I would say are the temptations of Jesus, power, empire, the idea of making a name for oneself, have caused people to be unable to endure. And so while it feels like power, empire, all these particular types of leadership accolades are giving people something to endure in public life, what it is ending up doing is killing their ministries by making it so that their ethics and values are pushed over and over and over again. And I am so tired of seeing, particularly men in power, we're in the era of Epstein, but we're also in the era of pastors having 8.5-year-long affairs and then showing up in public only when it has been exposed in some way. And so for me, endurance isn't just a matter of me, myself surviving. It's a matter of letting the flame that was fanned in me to begin with endure through the temptations of money, sex, power, and empire.
Thank you all for kind of setting the tone for, like, when we talk about endurance, what we're even saying, kind of defining that for this conversation. And I want to go back to Nia. You had mentioned shame, like you were talking about the shame of that we put on our bodies. But I want to start just talking a little bit more about survival without shame. And so, many people are just trying to get by today. How might survival itself be understood as spiritually meaningful rather than just kind of a means to an end or a coping mechanism or even a quiet failure?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and again, one of the first things that popped up in my mind is the story of Jesus. And the story of Jesus started out in a story of survival, right? There was fleeing, there was, right, like brown Palestinian young girl who was trying to understand being pregnant with the savior of the world, where to go with the empire on her back, and birthing a child into this world. Like, how many people, how many families, mothers can identify with that idea of bringing children into this world, raising children in this world where it feels like it is a fight to survive, that the powers that B are trying to literally destroy, right? There was a whole thing out there saying we're going to be killing the firstborn. Like this idea of genocide, of violence, of power that is being misused is the story of the Bible. And so, you know, as Jane was getting at, for those of us who have faith backgrounds, particularly in the Christian lineage, this idea of survival already in itself, to me, is a spiritual lineage that we are coming from. And so there does not have to be shame. And also, Brandi was getting at this, and Jane and everybody's getting at this. So we don't have to also have fear, because this is not new. And God is with us and in us through it all. And we also know from the Bible, from looking at the Psalms, from looking at historical texts and the ideas of when we come and we pause and we reflect, like so much of when we look at particular scriptures or religious canons, there's this idea of going back and remembering the stories of survival of our ancestors, as Phillip was getting at as well, right? Of looking back of where we've come from. And so we don't have to look back at these stories of, I think when we look back at stories of survival of our ancestors, we don't feel shame. We actually feel encouraged and inspired and connected. And so I think sometimes there's a lie that we can tell ourselves in the moment when we are in the present moment experiencing the survival, as if there's shame around that, as if there's been failure. However, we are connected to a generation, and we also know that that generation had this faith, and that's a part of the faith that we carry as well, that allows us to move forward and know that, hey, this is not the end. We believe that there is goodness. We believe that, you know, the story arc shifts towards justice, right? Towards a God of mercy, towards a God of goodness, right? And so I just feel so strongly about that, as you can see, of this idea of, hey, at the end of the day, like, we live in a broken world. Guess what? Sometimes I'm trying to survive when I'm just hanging out with my family, because they be bullying me sometimes. I love y'all, family, but I'm trying to survive. You know what I'm saying? So, like, to act like survival is not inherently a part of what it means to be human in this world with other humans, trying to survive in relationships, trying to survive with the dating apps out here. Like, we can go on and on. So if you get me, if you get what I'm picking up, like, that is a false narrative, a lie from the devil to find shame in survival. That is actually what it means to be human. And how can we actually acknowledge that, take away this added layer of shame that's just beating us down when we're already trying to survive, and actually say, hey, you know what? Like, it is what it is. It makes sense why we're experiencing this. And how can we look back to the stories of survival and actually be encouraged and know that this is not a failure? This is an opportunity for God to move and show up and transform, just like he did for those before us.
Amen. Yes. Brandi?
Yeah, one of the things that I have been considering lately is that when we feel shame about survival, it's typically because we have found ourselves in a place of exhaustion and isolation married together. And when I think about that, the person that comes to mind for me is Elijah, right? Elijah has this spiritual high in fighting the prophets of Baal. He's winning. And then suddenly all of that, like, spiritual stuff that everyone would want to happen, say in spiritual leadership or in an empire, that you destroy all of your enemies with supernatural power, we find the man wanting to die. Like, the high wasn't enough, the win wasn't enough, the victory wasn't enough, and he is barely hanging on. And I think that sometimes we use that text to talk about endurance. And I don't actually think that story is about how Elijah endures. It's how God helps him survive at first. And I think that's where we get into, and I will never knock any of this. I think it's important, you just need a nap and a snack from God. Like, I love all of that for the sake of survival, but that's not endurance. Because the thing that God actually gives Elijah in that story to endure is this remnant theology. He says, Elijah, there are 7,000 people who haven't bent the knee. There are 7,000 people out there who don't have the power you have. They don't have the anointing you have. And these 7,000 people are out there doing the work. And so I've been thinking a lot about moving away from shame in survival, as survival is a way that remnants come to be, where faithful people choose faithfulness over being a part of a nation state or an empire. And when that happens and we turn our eyes to the faithful folks who survive and endure, so I think it has to be both, we're able to go back out and do the work. And so I love that in that story of Elijah, the thing that God then tells him to do is like, hey, Elijah, chin up. There's 7,000 people. It's not just you, buddy. Like, get off your like sense that you are the only one, because that's its own type of mess. But go out now, sign up somebody else. Elisha's your boy, and go anoint some kings. Like, go know for yourself with your own hand that you are not the only one doing this work. And so I think when many of us feel shame, we have to recognize and address the ways that exhaustion and isolation have distorted our view of what God is doing and what our role and position is in the broader movement of God.
That's good. Let's talk about music for a second. Phillip, you're a musician and you're deeply involved in creative expression in that way. What role do you think music or song plays in helping people endure seasons that feel thin, whether that's emotionally or spiritually?
Yeah, so definitely going back to the idea of what's happened before me. One of my favorite clips that has found its way on the internet in different times, and I can't even tell you the day that this was. It's one of those civil rights movement era clips that I first saw it from Reverend Dr. Edie Smith out in Atlanta. He posted it, and it was a clip of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He's getting ready to preach, and Edie Smith leaves the context in the caption. But as he's getting ready to preach, you kind of see like his face just kind of like doing the somber, I'm about to go do it again. And Mahalia Jackson gets up and she goes, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and starts going off, and the church goes up, right? And it's one of those things it's one of those Black church experiences in particular that it's hard to explain to people who have not been there. But in the Black church, I lead worship cross-culturally a lot. And I have to explain all the time that the Black church in particular has this ethic of worshiping God through their soul, with their emotion, whereas other places they worship God with their mind and with their intellect. And in the soul moment right there was Edie Smith leaves the context. Mahalia Jackson knew he was disturbed, knew he was exhausted, knew he was tired. And she got up to encourage him. And by the time Mahalia Jackson hit Jericho, the whole church said, Jericho, Jericho. And there's this forceful spiritual response that's not, it's not saying in the song, we're going to get past Bull Connor. It's not saying in the song, we will get the Civil Rights Act passed. It's this memory, this past memory of who God has been to God's people, and who God has been to God's people throughout the history of their oppression, and what they believe God is capable of doing in the mindset of deliverance. So when you get to, and the walls came tumbling down, that the walls come, you know what your walls are, and you insert walls into the moment. And so I think there's this sense of endurance that is enabled through what music can do to emotions. Music kind of has this way of tapping into feelings that a seminar doesn't necessarily do. I'm a lecturer. Lectures don't do it the same way as the songs do it sometimes. And you can use a lecture to explain, but music almost has that prophetic way. I distinguish between preaching and teaching as saying teaching is a matter of comprehension and preaching is a matter of application. And for the prophetic nature of application that comes through song, when you hear something remind you, we can make it. Why? Because somebody else did before. How is it that my enslaved ancestors were able to make it through continuously blistering heat, injustice, dehumanization? How? They were singing regardless. They were creating regardless, right? So you have a present moment of creation, you have a future hope that's spoken out, and you have a past memory of whatever it is that taught our ancestors those pentatonic scales and those moanings and those groanings and all those things, right? They come together. And so you see it throughout the history of people who have endured, where there are so many different songs, whether it be Hold On, Change Is Coming, A Change Gonna Come, Wake Up Everybody, all these different songs that come back. Even I remember my mom telling me my mom had a period of time where she wasn't walking with Jesus, and she was in the club when the Clark sisters, You Brought the Sunshine came out. And the Clark sisters, You Brought the Sunshine, she in the club, they all trying to get drinks, and she hears, I'm a witness that Jesus will make a difference in your life. And she's like, dang it, man, like God is calling me back and I'm trying to be away, right? And so there's a collective memory that is instilled through song. There's a collective memory and a collective solidarity that is reinforced through song. Even just songs that aren't sung in Scripture. Paul has this thing in I believe it's First Timothy or Second Timothy. I mix it up sometimes. Where he talks to Timothy and he repeats this thing and he says, if we deny him, God, he'll deny us. If we suffer with him, we'll reign with him. But if we're faithless, he remains faithful because he can't deny himself. And scholars have said that's a song that he's repeating. When Paul says, I'm telling you, what was of first importance, that Christ died in accordance to the Scriptures and was raised in accordance to the Scriptures. These were memory songs, means by which they would be able to interpret what was going on. And even with my own kids, in the mornings when my kids go to school, we have a little a saying that we say every day, and it becomes like a rhythm in music, where I ask them every day, are you a maker or a taker? They say maker. Are you a consumer or producer? They say producer. And I say, who's my favorite, their name in the whole wide world? And they say me. And then I say it loud, and they all go, I'm Black and I'm proud. And that's what they say before they go to school. Because I'm not going to let the school tell you what your dignity is before I tell you and remind you of what your dignity is. So I think that's the purpose of music. When your spirit is not ready to endure, music has this way of calling back something transcendent within you to try and to keep going, but not for the sake of forcing yourself, but almost holding on to what God gave somebody else through creativity. And that becomes the thread you hold on to in your weakest moments. That's my kind of how I put it.
I love that. And I love how your examples also kind of harken back to that historical memory and, what we hold in terms of what has come before us. And so, Jane, I want to shift into history a little bit and get from your perspective. Are there communities or moments that model faithful endurance in ways that the modern church might overlook?
Well, I think Phillip already named one of the most powerful models of faithful endurance in the U.S. context. Actually, in the U.S. context, but also just in the Americas generally, so the Black church. So thinking about how people survived all the things that were named, dehumanization, enslavement, Jim Crow in the U.S. context, and just the longer freedom struggle. And when I think about the Black church in particular, it's a model for Black Americans, but it's really a model for all people, not just Americans, but just all people. And in, when I teach my U.S. history classes, like we always, we talk about how all the different movements that we study in kind of 19th, 20th century U.S. history, they all build on the Black freedom struggle. So abolition, right? And white women's suffrage actually builds on the abolitionist movement. I'm teaching that right now in my history survey. And also when we think about the 20th century, just freedom struggles of the post-war movement, of the post-war period, all the movements of the 60s and 70s, those all build on the Black freedom struggle. I'm talking about Chicano movement, Asian American movement, Red Power movement, women's kind of second wave feminism, women's rights. So all of those movements. So when we think about kind of these powerful models, that's probably the first I'll name. In my own research, so I've been learning a lot more recently about Japanese American Christians who were incarcerated during World War II and how they responded to their incarceration. I think a lot about this history because I'm not Japanese American, so I actually study this as an outsider, and I'm, the child of immigrants who came in the 1970s. So thinking about kind of how we today relate to this history. And the fact is, this is a living history because there are folks who were incarcerated. One of my favorite faithful believers here in LA, Bill Watanabe, founder of the Little Tokyo Service Center, has spent his entire life in service to others, faithful believer. He was born in the Manzanar incarceration camp. And so when I think about kind of this history, it's very much still with us. So for Japanese American Christians, 126,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated. 2/3 of those were US born, US citizens. He was a US born, US citizen. And the folks who write about this history, most white denominations, Protestant denominations and other organizations didn't really fight or contest the incarceration. So there were some exceptions. So like some American Baptists, some Quakers were the exception probably, some Methodists. So you had some kind of individual clergy and leaders from kind of mainstream or white Protestant circles. They raised objections, but generally speaking, not really. There wasn't a lot of resistance. But for the Japanese Americans who were in the camps between 1942 and sometimes as late as 1946, what did it look like for them to just kind of keep the faith and to kind of continue to believe in Jesus? And so, I've been reading these stories, these histories about, second generation itinerant, so Japanese American preachers who would travel from camp to camp in the US West, giving sermons, leading Bible studies. And there are even these documented like revivals where you had altar calls where many people would come up and receive Jesus, like in the camps. And, I think a lot about that nowadays too, because when I think about what's happening now, Japanese American activists have been really at the forefront of a lot of the calls to resist ICE, thinking about what detention camps look like now, the expansion of detention to many different groups, including asylum seekers. I know there's a court case that's going to be decided today, ruling on whether asylum seekers, people seeking refugee status, can be detained and incarcerated. And so it's not, again, the fact that this is a more recent and kind of living history, that to me, and the fact that there are folks from that community who are really active today, and these are believers who root their activism in their Christian faith. I mean, that to me is a really kind of living example of kind of faithful endurance in the church. And the last thing I'll say is, I really want to lift up what Brandi and Nia shared earlier. It's this idea, this is kind of what I was trying to allude to. I think these historical models of faithful endurance, these historical models, I think you're right. It's really important to think of them as kind of inspirations and to think of them as examples of faithful believers and not as measuring sticks for kind of how, what our lives are supposed to look like today. And so I think that's a really powerful and important word. So I just want to reiterate that for us.
I think on the same token, can you just like speak to a little bit like what's at risk by losing these historical awareness? Because I agree. I think we have to kind of hold them in perspective. But do you have some insight on, or just, maybe just like a couple of words on kind of like, what do we risk when we lose that history and that historical awareness?
Yeah, I think if we lose historical awareness altogether, then I feel like that actually first of all, we lose hope. We risk losing hope because literally, if we don't have historical models, if we can't think about people who have endured, survived, resisted, then we kind of feel like we're like test cases or we're the first. And the reality is we're not the first. Like there have been, again. So history, I think, can be incredibly powerful as a source of hope, as a source of resilience, as a source of just strength. So I don't, and I'm a historian, so I love history, but this is my entire life here. But but I do think, I don't know, like historians, we care a lot about the past. We trace through lines, we trace commonalities. We also think about what's different, because that's also important to think about, that we have to also kind of understand our present context. And it's not as if people haven't overcome difficult things in the past. But in this moment, we're borrowing and we're building on what people have done before, but we're also crafting our own stories. So that's also important to realize and recognize. So the similarities, but also the differences.
Yes. I want to remind everyone that's watching, if you have questions that you want to ask the panel, I'm going to open it up in a few minutes to Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the chat. I wanted to talk a little bit about grief and joy. And this is for Nia. Some traditions hold grief and joy simultaneously, rather than treating them as opposites. And I was wondering if you have some wisdom for weary communities.
Yes. So I absolutely just feel as though my life, and I really do believe the human experience, is literally the paradox of joy and grief, and the idea of the expansiveness of our human experience, that we can experience those simultaneously. It's not like, oh, I'm sad and I'm happy and then I'm happy. Like I can be both of those things at the same time. And one of my most grounding visions what I hold to is from Toni Morrison's book, Beloved. And shout out, because I saw somebody in the crowd is from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm actually born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. And this book takes place in Cincinnati, Ohio. Also, shout out to the Chicagoans. I'm based in Chicago now. So good to see all of the folks out there in the audience. But there's a character in Beloved named Baby Suggs. And to me, she is a kind of like preacher pastoral figure in the book Beloved. The book takes place after the Civil War. We're kind of in the Reconstruction era, but we're also in that area where there's still the idea of people who were previously enslaved, right? The Black folk are still in their own communities. They don't have full rights yet. And so what happens is these folks, right, they're in their own cabins, they're in their own area, and Baby Suggs will come and gather them into what she calls, or the book calls, Toni Morrison calls, the clearing. And there is a beautiful, I should have read it. I should have had it out here. If anybody can pull it up, follow up with me. I should have it memorized. I should have it tattooed on my body. Anyways, it is a beautiful section where she describes the clearing as a place where young men come and cry, older women come to dance, right? Women come to sing. It's this place where grief and joy meet and are in communion. And this is the heart of who I am, and also the work that I do, because I believe that there is such an incredible importance and power when we feel the fullness of our humanity. And so I think that that's what allows us to endure. That's what allows us to survive. And just to ground this down one more level, I spent the last 3 years in South America. I was 2 years in Cali, Colombia, and 1 year, 9 months in the state of Bahia, Brazil, and the city of Salvador. And both of those cities, Cali, Colombia, I did not know this until I arrived there, is the second Blackest city in Latin America. And Salvador Bahia is the first in Brazil Blackest city in Latin America. It is the Blackest city outside of Africa. And when I tell you, our homies, my Afro-diasporic siblings, know deep grief and also deep joy. Some people are like, Nia, why are you so happy? Do you know my life? If you knew my life, I have joy because I know the depth of grief. When you look at the history of the folks in Cali, Colombia, how they got there, right? The transatlantic slave trade hit the Atlantic coast. But then, so a lot of people think of Cartagena. It's full of Black folk, Black Afro-Colombianos, right? But there was gold on the Pacific coast. So colonizers brought, right? The Spanish brought and had the Black folk walk all the way, drag them all the way to the Pacific coast to mine for gold, all of these things that they wanted. And then you come into earlier, more recent times, and folks came from the Pacific coast to Cali. That's the closest, biggest city. But our ancestors, our Afro-diasporic siblings, knew this deep grief. And when I came to Cali, it was a bunch of Afro-Colombianos who had come and fled from the Pacific coast. And they had that deep grief. And at the same time, they said, we know who we are. We know the value in our traditions, in our songs, in our music, in our food. And so my 2 years there was every Sunday, I would go to La Azotea de Doña Elena. And they called it Azotea de la Abuela, the rooftop garden of grandma. And we would come and we would dance and we would eat and we would cry and we would laugh. And to me, I was like, this is the clearing. We need clearings to survive. We need clearings to endure, because in the clearings are the places where we can both grieve and remember and also feel the difficulties of what we're experiencing in this moment. And we can also remember also the stories of faith and joy, and we can embody that. There, I'll end there with saying there's also something about the embodiment of grief and joy that I think is essential for us always as humanity, particularly in moments that we are now, that we don't just say, oh, I'm sad. We cry. There are whole things around wailing, right? There's cultures around like cry and dance and eat good food and taste that joy. So, yeah, I love joy and grief. That is my second middle name. So
I love it. So this question is for Phillip and for Brandi. If both of you can answer, how do you distinguish between faithful endurance and the unhealthy pressure to perform strength or to keep pushing beyond human limits?
Brandi, can you go first? Because I want to hear what you have to say. Is that bad? I like legit, like, I want to hear what Brandi says first.
Well, I mean, I go kind of simplistic on this one, which is like, I can't do the work if I'm dead. Like, I can't do the work if I'm dead. And I think that so much of this kind of endurance and survival work requires us to pay attention to the ways that when we put our work into, our hope into, our efforts, our extra measures of strength into systems, they'll kill us. Because systems are not people, systems are not God, they will kill us. And so for me, one of the things that I've been wrestling with is how to hold people and movements at the center of my enduring, because those people and those communities, those movements are the things that are going to sustain me. Because what I have watched happen currently, or what I've watched happen historically that is manifesting currently, is the religious right started, right, as a group of people with a deep-rooted faith in Jesus. I don't, white Jesus for sure, but still Jesus. And they found a way to figure out what that meant for them. And at first, a lot of their work was centered around people and around families. It was, and while I disagree with their conclusions, I can't fault their the attempts at faithfulness. I can't fault that. And they burned every person along the way out, leaving a trail of bodies to get to where we're at right now. And what's left is a system that doesn't care about people and that doesn't sustain people. And as I watch their infighting, I'm like, if y'all just cared about people, those people would sustain you. Those movements would sustain you. Instead, they're leaving behind a trail of death. And so I am trying to figure out what it means to not build systems that kill the people that they're supposed to save. And so I work at a church currently, and I've watched a ton of people come through our doors with church trauma that's born of being burned out on the mission, on the ministry, on some kind of faithful vision or faithful adherence to a vision that wasn't people-centered. And so for me, if like your church is giant, but nobody feels like they're cared for, everyone feels invisible, that's not faithfulness. That is just building a system. And so for me, I've been becoming more and more anti-system centric, even if I still believe in the ability for systems to help preserve life, because nobody else in my community can resist or be faithful if they are dead either.
See. I'm trying to act right on this stream. I'm supposed to be professional today. I'm supposed to be professional and act right. I wanted to throw something. She said, I can't do it if I'm dead. I said, speak, Brandi. Okay, bring it back. All right. What I was trying to say was, yeah, man. Listen, okay, so I'll give two parts to this. So one, I think when we talk about faithful endurance, I'm going to take the word endurance out for a second, just stick on faithfulness. If I'm a Bible nerd like I am, then faithfulness is supposed to be a fruit of the Spirit. It's supposed to be a natural outworking of the Spirit working in my life and of me in community with Jesus. If I'm in community with Jesus, faithfulness is supposed to be a natural consequence. If something is a natural consequence, it's not something that you have to make happen. I never have to wake up and try to be Black. Never. Because I was born Black. I woke up that way. It's a part of the essence of who I am. And if part of the essence of who I am as a believer in Jesus is somebody that can be faithful, that can endure in faithfulness to Jesus, but despite anything else going on, just faithfulness, natural faithfulness and communion with Jesus, then that shouldn't be something I should feel myself having to push myself to do. Now, do you have to take care of fruit and all of these things? Of course you do. Do you have to take care of the plants that we cultivate? Sure. But let's not extend the metaphor too hard. If it's something you're working too hard to do, it might not be healthy. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just is a reality. And I know what's interesting in my culture that I come from in the Black church, we have embodied joy often, and I'm speaking in broad generalities, but we have embodied joy as kind of a part of our worship flow. So worship for us, when we're worshiping God, it's natural for somebody to just yell because they feel like yelling. It's natural for somebody to just agree out loud because they agree. It's natural for somebody to, with their body, embody movement, dance, joy, jumping, whatever it is, right? But this unhealthy part that seeps into my culture, that seeped in really because of televangelism, among a lot of other things, was this going from this is a natural embodiment to it becoming a transactional piece of how we ensure that God takes care of us. If you would just praise a little harder, if you would just laugh a little louder, if you just scream a little longer, if you just shout a little bit more, if you just dance a little harder, this dance is for your neighbor, this dance is for your cousin, this dance is for the person in jail, this dance is for what you're trying to get done in the Senate. it's transactional now. Now I'm trying to bargain and bribe my way. And I think through our own bodies, we have a sense in which we try to use a transactional approach to God and a transactional approach to ourselves. Like if I push hard enough, my body will produce something that will allow me to keep going. And that we can't barter with ourselves. I think Nia spoke about it earlier, being able to understand and respect your body. One of the best things my wife has ever done for me is teach me how to just listen to what my body's doing. Something as simple as my survival mindset of having been homeless and hungry for a little bit. When I would go to the store, go to a restaurant, I would feel like I need to eat everything on my plate because I paid for it. And she was like, babe, your stomach is full. It's okay. If you have this little bit left on your plate, you don't have to get a goodie bag and take it home. It's okay. Like, and I'm like, well, what? Like, it's okay. Respect that you're full, right? So I think that, yeah, without belaboring it, there's a sense in which pushing past your human limits is actually denying the dignity of how God chose to allow your body to respond. God chooses to allow our bodies to get exhausted, to fall asleep, to be exhausted, to need to stop having input. Mute and do not disturb our gifts from God. And the fact that I, in 2020, told myself, I will no longer argue with people about my dignity. I will no longer argue about things that I already know. I will no longer come up and contend for things that I have already done the research to prove to be true. That has blessed the last 6 years of my life. I wish I would argue with you. I live this. Get out my face. Please and thank you. I'm going to talk to somebody who cares so that I can be here tomorrow. So, yeah.
Amen. Well, we have some questions that are coming in through email, and I want to, because you were talking about, Phillip, you had mentioned kind of the transactional nature, and somebody asked the question, how can churches embody endurance collectively, not just individually? And it kind of reminded me of that, what you were talking about in terms of transactional. Like, what's the opposite of that? Like, how can churches embody endurance collectively? It's for anyone.
My church is very actively wrestling with this right now. And there's that phrase like many hands make light work. And I actually don't know if I believe that. I think like many hands make possible work, because I think the work doesn't always feel light. And so like one of the things that we've been wrestling with in my community is we're in the heart of Seattle, and the fentanyl crisis here is pretty aggressive. And so we've had encampments around our building consistently, right? We're picking up needles and fecal matter all the time. We're like walking through tents. We're doing all kinds of things. And that work is not easy work to endure through, and is a product of the current administration's policies, exacerbating already present issues of poverty. And so one of the things that we decided to do was, we were like, oh, what does it mean if we're like worshiping on Sunday mornings? We're like cleaning up outside, but it doesn't actually mean anything for our neighbors. Like, how do we endure what is like the daily discomfort and sometimes danger of this current situation around us? And so we just started interrupting our Sunday morning service structures. Instead of doing our whole worship, hooting and hollering, which I love, and our sermons and all of that, we just decided we're going to open up a clothing distribution day that we do every year and just do it for our Sunday morning. So that it's not something that you just can volunteer to get into. It's something that everybody is saying, I have a hand in this. So we have tables where people are writing to their legislators. We have folks who are walking folks one-on-one as personal shoppers through our distribution day. We bring, I made like a stock pot this big of chili to make sure that we could feed people. And so that work, while not sustainable for one person to do all the time, allows us to know that we're collectively doing the work together. And I think in many churches, the problem is that people abdicate. If you go into a church that says they're about justice, it's easy for congregants to abdicate their own responsibility to the church leadership or the church structure, saying, hey, I go to a church that does this thing, rather than I'm a person within my community who participates in the ongoing redemptive work of God. And so I think part of it is being willing to kill the sacred cows of our structures and to create spaces where people have soft on-ramps to doing justice work that can endure when many of us do it together and know that we're doing it together.
Yes, that's good. Yes. Any other responses to that question? We have a couple more questions that came in from email.
I would just say, as another church person, Jane, please, because I'm 30 seconds on this. I would just say churches should embody sustainability more than consistency. So I think our goals as churches in America, by virtue of being downstream of capitalism, is often to remain consistent, remain open, remain profitable, to lack of a better word. And I think we should focus more on sustainability. I'm grateful that my church is able to own a building right now. But if our church needs to sell the building so that we can be sustainable, we should be happy to write that check. We should be happy to do that, so that we can embody what it means to still be here, not just to consistently be here, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And so I think that just the mindset of looking at the money that comes in through a collective group of people as our money and not entities' money that needs to be built up higher. And that, like Brandi said, the outsourcing and all that stuff, that whole 80-20 rule of 80% of the church receiving from 20% of the labor, or you know what I'm saying? It's just like, that doesn't make any sense. It really, if we want to be, then we have to focus on being and not just focus on maintaining. And I think that gives people the understanding that the ministry does not exist solely for it to be something that someone can prop up and say, look at this ministry, but that it can have human results that are lasting and meaningful, and allow people to feel that at their darkest and at their weakest, there is a collective of strength that they can actually rely upon.
Jane?
I just wanted to add that by the way, I love the organized church, and I don't want to undermine them. So I'm all about the organized church, and I grew up in an organized church. In my own life, so there will be folks maybe here watching part of the conversation. I just, also want to think about kind of defining the church expansively. So if in my own life, like in periods of time where, for a lot of folks, maybe they might be at organized churches where it's just really hard because folks are not on the same page. I've been wrestling with that for many years. And so one sustaining community that's been in many ways church for me has been just a small group of women that I meet with. We're all believers. We all love Jesus. We might not belong to the same congregations, but there are ways that we can do things because we're all like-minded. So there are ways that some of the energy you might sometimes, if you're in a place where you might not agree with a lot of folks, or you might be in a place, I'm just speaking, I'm in the English ministry of a Korean immigrant church. And this is my first time back in many decades. And I'm there for many reasons, primarily family related. And, it's a new experience for me as well. But I think, this might resonate with some folks. There are going to be periods of time where you're part of a congregation that it's just, the fight itself is just to have people think about things. The fight itself is actually just having folks kind of get on the same page. And that takes a lot of energy. And I think that's really important. That's extremely important. Also being in communities where folks are on the same page, where you're like-minded and you have kind of, you're of the same heart. And being able to also think about those communities as not organized church, but just a different kind of church. And so I also want to just put that out there just for the many, many folks who might still be struggling with belonging in an organized congregation.
I'd love to just hop on the back of that real quick, because Jane, I'm gonna let you. I left the church. I left the church because I was like, this ain't it. I was not feeling the work of God in the ways that I was hoping to, because sometimes of the limitations that I felt like we're talking about, the structures, different things like that. And I was also this expansive experience of God as I was dancing salsa. I was with these women in the clearings. And what brought me back to the church was moving here to the west side of Chicago. And I just wanted to hang out with my friends. And I came to this church and they were doing the work like Brandi is talking about. Like, they were talking about what was happening with federal troops being sent here. We were talking about what does that mean? And I was like, oh my gosh, I know that what I want to do in my life is be paired with God and the work of God and seeing that transformed. And I'm seeing that in this church. And whether I have qualms or not with the institution of the church, capital C, whatever we want to call it, I know that there is a work of God moving in this community. So I'm saying yes to that. And so I just want to say yes and amen to that as well.
Okay, we have one more question. In terms of time, we have room for one more question, And this can go to anyone who can answer in 1 minute. But it's a question, but it's a really good question. So I want to make sure, but since this is a panel on endurance, someone asked, what do you do when you feel spiritually numb?
Try new things you haven't done before. Walk a labyrinth, find a new practice, go to a cross-cultural church experience or a conference, do something that kind of shakes up the norm.
Personally, I'm making my business to tell God the truth. That's what I do. I have to fight constantly because I'm from a deeply religious background, and we do a lot of talking around things where I come from. I make it so that in my moments where I don't want to be near God and I don't know what's wrong with me and I don't know why that's my prayer. God, I don't know why I feel like this. I know you're listening. That's how I know I'm engaging, is I'm engaging my faith by saying, I'm going to talk, though I feel like I'm talking to a wall. I know God is hearing me. So in my God is hearing me, I'm going to say exactly how I feel. I will be bluntly honest with God. I will, as Job said, I will speak from the depths of my soul and the despair of my soul, wherever that is, and the numbness, whatever it is. I will know and pray that my honesty is seed enough. And usually it is.
That's great. That's great. Maybe I can cheat a little bit and ask one more question. But you got to answer in 30 seconds. No, you got to answer quick. But this is a question that did come from YouTube, and it says Psalm 16:11 says, "In God's presence there is fullness of joy." And as we endure the hardships of life and the sins of being human, how do you see and experience the fullness of joy in the presence of God? 1 minute.
I was actually going to answer this question through answering that other question about what do we do when we're feeling numb. And I go into my body. I'm telling y'all, God, anyways, there's a whole sermon on that. In our bodies, when was the last time I physically felt joy? Was it eating that really good burger? Was it salsa dancing? Was it hanging out with my friend? And that to me is a testimony of the fullness of joy in God's, like feeling that aliveness, and not just talking about like feelings. Look, it felt good. No, like literally, I felt warmth in my chest. I felt expansiveness in my chest versus I felt constricted. I felt cold. I felt a little bit not just nervous. What is nervous? They were shaking, right? When did I feel the sensations of joy physically? Because I believe our God is a God in the physical as well. And so then I think about that. So that's how I understand and think about the fullness of joy in the presence of God. I know God is present when I am feeling joy. When I'm not feeling joy, I ask, is this a place where God is? And then when I'm numb, I say, I feel numb, so I'm not maybe feeling the fullness of God's presence. And I say, when was the last time? Can I return?
And on that note, I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for your generosity, for your wisdom, and just for your openness, and just for being transparent and authentic on this panel. Thank you so much for taking the time. And for all of you that joined us, thank you so much. I hope this webinar was encouraging for you. So I invite you all to visit our CSA website, where you can find hundreds of articles and resources on how to navigate this current cultural moment. We also have information on there on how to understand what working towards justice looks like as we engage many different issues today. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. God bless.